Hello, hello. Good afternoon. Can we start? Yes. Welcome back to this main session of Young Scholars Agora. I hope you you enjoyed a good lunch then. Yeah. Okay. Now then, we will have time 9 minutes for this session. So we'll end at 3 p.m. So now we have not enough time. You have some sufficient time for each speaker. I will give 12 to maximum 15 minutes to each panelist, and so you can be, now then you can have more time. And then I'll follow the order of the morning session, the introductory session. So our first speaker is the Miss Manekara Chige, and then I'll ask, I'll invite her just to take the floor. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Imali Manikarachi. First of all, I'm very much honored to be here speaking to you today. Thank you very much, Korea Maritime Institute, for giving me this opportunity. My presentation today is Marine and Maritime Education for Sustainable Blue Growth. When we talk about the education, and from the name of this session, Young Scholars Agora, so we are talking about the places where the scholars are developed in the first place. So I'm going to talk about the challenges in developing countries when it comes to marine and maritime education, and how these challenges can be addressed for the sustainable development of the developing nations. So, the education provides ventures for personal and professional development in terms of shaping an individual's attitudes, character, ideas, and skills. So if a person can be educated in some certain subjects, they can create opportunities and also change the world in a positive way. When it comes to marine and maritime education, it is very much important in the modern world because we are talking about blue economy or blue growth, because a lot of the natural resources in the land are now running out, and we are more and more seeking for opportunities in the oceans. Therefore, the future of the global economy is very much dependent on the marine and maritime sectors. Therefore, developing the necessary capacities in these fields is very much important. Therefore, marine and maritime education facilitates the knowledge transformation that is vital for capacity development in a rapidly developing world. I found this cartoon on the internet, and I very much like this, the message that it delivers. Because in one of the previous sessions, we talked about how the legal decision should be based on science, and this is something that I show all the time for people when they ask what I'm doing. So you can see in the picture below, there are two very old fish talking to each other. And one says, in the old days, it used to be all about us. And the other fish says, now it's so complex with all these modern ocean functions and uses. So the uses of oceans have been shifted from basically fishing to many other aspects right now in the world. And therefore, the scholars or the capacities that we develop should be of with multiple, or we call multidisciplinary aspects, such as we have to think like a fisherman, environmentalist, economist, social scientist, spatial planner, political sciences, and lawyer to get a comprehensive idea of what is happening in the marine and maritime realms today. Then, education for blue growth. The role of academia in Blue Growth is very much important because there we develop the capacity for research and also knowledge dissemination. And these aspects are very much important for the industries that are based on the ocean, for skills and competencies development of the professionals. And these skills and competencies are very much important for Blue Growth, where we talked about the sustainable utilization and management of ocean resources. So in return, we develop the quality of life of the communities, and also it is important for sustainable development, especially for the developing nations. When it comes to marine and maritime education, the role of maritime and ocean universities play is very much important, and these are specific universities or academic institutions where it provides opportunities of education for the people who are taking up careers in the maritime field. So the role of these universities are very important, and there are many such universities around the world. And especially I'm going to talk about the issues that such universities in the developing world are facing and how UNCLOS could helpful to overcome all these challenges. So, research and capacity development are the two areas that I'm going to make relevant to the work of marine and maritime universities, which of course UNCLOS is addressing. For example, we need a lot of research capacities for the purpose of exploring the marine natural resources and the status of the marine resources. Researchers such as in terms of oceanography, fisheries, marine ecology are very much important to secure the food security of the world and also to improve the environmental quality. Also, research areas such as weather patterns and tsunami risks are so important to predict how safe the vulnerable coastal communities are and how the coastal infrastructure should be developed. And also research areas in legal and economic aspects are important to make informed decisions. And also when it comes to capacity development, marine technology, and also the skills and responses that we need for disaster management is very much important, and these are directly relevant to make the professionals skilled in their professions. So all these aspects are very much important for marine and maritime universities, which should be the mandates of their deliverables. So what are the challenges that we face? In the developing world, always we have to, as academic institutions, we have to fight for funding. You know, we have a couple of scholars, couple of academics from universities, so we know that how hard it is to secure funding for our research. And also, especially the developing countries, we lack experts who have the correct knowledge that we need to develop our curricula and the course modules. And also, we have a lot of technological barriers, the lack of equipment that is necessary for research. And also the competitive interests from other different aspects or other different subjects, because we are talking about securing funding from the government. Therefore, a lot of other subjects and other areas might come up with plans saying that, okay, our research area are the more important, therefore you should give funding for us. So this kind of competitive interests are also making the mandates of maritime universities challenging. So when it comes to UNCLOS, there are two areas that I have identified that are relevant for the work of marine and maritime universities. Those are the marine scientific research, which is addressed by part 13, and also the transfer of marine technology, which is addressed under part 14. So when it comes to marine scientific research and also the marine technology transfer, I understand the importance of international cooperation is very much relevant to make the work of marine and maritime universities in the developing world countable for the development of their own nations. So there are a couple of articles that require the cooperation, international cooperations to promote the marine scientific research, and also to create favorable conditions to conduct marine scientific research, and also cooperate for publishing and knowledge dissemination. And when it comes to development and transfer of marine technology, again, international cooperation is important for the purpose of secure international funding for ocean research and development, also to establish generally accepted guidelines, and also coordinate regional and global transfer of marine technology activities according to the interests of developing states, and encourage transfer of marine technology to developing states with regards to the activities in the area. And apart from that, there are other provisions provided by the UNCLOS that are relevant for capacity building and also marine scientific research. Some mention here marine scientific research in the area, and also scientific and technical assistance to developing states for protection and preservation of the marine environment and the prevention, reduction and control of marine pollution. So for capacity development in these areas are very much important, and the role of maritime universities with regards to that shall be promoted. And when it comes to UNCLOS, I see those weaknesses. There are no institutional mechanism to deliver the transfer of marine technology and capacity building, because it just say that the mechanism should be developed, but how to develop it for the, especially for developing countries, is not very clear. And also there is no financial mechanism for fund allocation. Also, how to request assistance, because the developing states, when they do not have the correct knowledge, how can they recognize the importance of science in the first place? And also, how the monitoring of the effectiveness of the transfer of marine technology shall be conducted, it's not very much clear. So, what are the improvements? The BBNJ treaty would be one of the major instruments that is going to be available in the future that can be helpful for capacity development, because one of the 4 elements of BBNJ treaty is to improve the capacity development for the marine scientific research in the high seas. And also the work of UNESCO IOC. Apart from the International Seabed Authority, UNESCO IOC is the only UN body which carries out capacity development programs for the purpose of marine science development. And also we should also praise their work for the UN Decade of Ocean Sciences for Sustainable Development, which makes a lot of opportunities available for the people coming from developing region. And also public-private partnerships and philanthropic funding is very much important for such institutes to grow. Also, decentralized and open access data is again important to make research publicly available to make better decisions. And also ICT, information and communication technology for distance learning, which is one of the reasons that I'm here as a participant for the online YOC Academy. So these can be very effective measures to improve introduce the improvements for the existing mechanism. And I had to show this picture. This is one of the great examples of international cooperation for development of the capacities in maritime universities. This is an event organized by myself for my university, which is Ocean University of Sri Lanka. And the Korean government, KOICA, through KOICA project, they have very generously helping us to improve our capacity, and also in terms of infrastructure and also human resource development. They give us a lot of opportunities for our lecturers and our students to come to Korea and participate in exchange programs. So we are very much grateful for that. So once we have these opportunities, this support from international cooperation, we can do more than what it should be done by a maritime university. We can go further, one step further, and not only become an excelled Maritime University, but also we can serve for the community. So this picture shows some of our students engaged in research and capacity development programs. They involve with the community. We serve as a community, which is a university serving for the community. So we engage in stock assessment research, marine biofouling, environmental monitoring. Also, we promote the concept of ocean literacy through capacity development of the school children. And also we conduct fisher community programs, ecosystem restoration. So all these activities are being done because of all this help that make available for us. And finally, before ending our presentation, I want to show you this image. I don't know who have quoted this, but this pretty much sums up the message that I want to deliver. Give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime. So education is one of the most important elements available to make a change in the world for a positive change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Manikarachi, for your lucid presentation based on your experience as an educator. She put emphasis on the role of education in sustainable blue growth and as well as on how UNCLOS can provide some promising grounds to strengthen the capacity of knowledge dissemination for better order of the world's oceans. And then I note that she pointed out some challenges facing developing continents in ocean issues. And she listed, for instance, the lack of funds, the lack of experts, and the technology barriers, and the competitive interest. And then I also note that she drew our attention to Part 13, Marine Scientific Research, and Part 15, development the transfer of marine technology of UNCLOS. And then in my view, this Part 14 is almost dormant. I must confess, I haven't paid some sufficient attention to this part. Yeah. And I thank you for just drawing our attention to this part. Okay. Our next speaker, Ms. Penosa. Yes, please go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon to everyone who's still here. Thank you for joining us for our last panel of the conference. So as I said earlier this morning, I will be discussing some updates on the development of a regulatory framework for autonomous ships at the IMO. And I did preface my presentation with some of the points that are on this slide earlier. In particular, I said that MAS, as it is being discussed in the IMO, would pertain to a narrow class of ships under the greater umbrella term that may be encompassed under the notion of unmanned maritime systems, which would include, to the furthest extent, naval drones and research devices that are autonomous in their seagoing voyages. So I did not discuss this morning the last set of bullets, which is about the approaches, some of the approaches that the discussions at the IMO have been taking, which is to see whether there could be an application of equivalences in concept under the existing instruments, without deviating too much from what is already within the regulatory framework. But I will go back to that later on. So I'm not sure if it's very clear, but I would just start by introducing how the IMO is structured, for those who may not be too familiar with it. Most of the work is done through the committees, so those are the boxes in blue in the middle. We have 5 committees, the major ones that are through which most of the work of the IMO is done are the Maritime Safety and Marine Environment Protection Committees. We also have the Legal Committee, the Technical Cooperation Committee, and the Facilitation Committee. So out of these 5 committees, work relating to MAS is going on with respect to the Maritime Safety Committee, the Legal Committee, and the Facilitation Committee. So it's not being discussed presently at the Marine Environment Protection Committee, on the understanding that the work of the MEPC is very closely related to that of the MSC, so the concerns would be similar, the appreciation would be more or less the same. Yes, so that would be the structure of the organization. And it is recognized that the IMO is a competent international organization for matters of shipping and navigation under the Law of the Sea Convention. And it does its role with respect to the convention through rules of reference and the development of generally accepted international rules and standards, which allows the Law of the Sea Convention really to become a living instrument insofar as these organizations, specialized organizations of the UN, are able to fill in some of the unsettled issues or the gaps that may not be settled in the original instruments. So how did the discussions begin at the IMO? In 2015, the UK submitted information on its national approach to marine autonomous systems, MAS. So that includes the whole plethora of types of ships and vessels that may have autonomous functions. It wasn't until 2 years later, in 2017, that there was a proposal for the conduct of regulatory scoping exercise. I will refer to this a lot, RSE, in my presentation. And over the years, it would go on to be developed as a step-by-step process by which each of the 3 committees, the MSC, FAL, and legal committees, would review their individual instruments and see what is the place for MAS within those instruments. So these are some initial views that have been put forward in the IMO at the initial stages of the discussions on MAS. Of course, one of the major points that has been raised was the implications on and for MAS with respect to UNCLOS, the need for information sharing and lessons learned with other international organizations and UN bodies, including the Division of Ocean Affairs and Law of the Sea. Some NGOs would also voice concerns about the lack of a critical emergency to develop these sets of rules, since it seemed at that time to be very far into the future. And there was also a request for transparency with respect to the work being done by industry in the development of autonomous technology, and divergent views on whether the existence of autonomous ships is actually consistent with the UNCLOS, where our understanding at a general level is that you require manning in order to safely discharge your responsibilities as a flag state with respect to an entity that is called a ship or a vessel. So what has been the approach in these regulatory scoping exercises? Basically, the committees asked whether it is necessary to apply equivalences, to amend, or to adopt new instruments in order to bring about the safe operation and navigation of MAS, Maritime Autonomous Surface Ships. So in the course of the RSEs, they have developed a framework by which to see exactly what kind of ships are we talking about. So there is this framework of 4 degrees of autonomy, from 1 to 4, least to most autonomous. So I'll give you a moment to see and appreciate how the gradation of those levels of autonomy would be. So to a certain extent, levels 1 and 2 are already present in commercial navigation. It's technology that is already available. And most of the preparation really would be as regards level 3 and 4 of autonomy. Okay, so I just put this here as a recollection of how else the issue progressed at the IMO. In 2019, interim guidelines for MAS trials were approved by the Maritime Safety Committee, conscious that actually within the domestic sphere, there are already many states that are engaged in trials of autonomous ships within their national waters. And the interim guidelines provide that those trials should be conducted in the absence of definitive rules in a manner that provides at least the same degree of safety, security, and protection of the environment as provided by the relevant instruments. Okay, so from around 2017, the work of the Maritime Safety Committee was partially completed with the issuance of the mass final report of the working group on autonomous ships, and that was in 2021. And this has been their approach, so I will not go through that in much detail, except to say that this is the structure of how this issue has been examined. Okay, by 2021, with the 104th session of the Maritime Safety Committee, it has been agreed that by 2025, a new output on a goal-based instrument for maritime autonomous surface ships will be developed. So finally, the work of the regulatory scoping exercise has arrived at this conclusion that an instrument will have to be developed. Initially, non-mandatory instruments, and then later on, the completion of a mandatory instrument in the implementation of the different IMO conventions. So as I said earlier, it's not only the Maritime Safety Committee that has been doing work on this, but also the legal and facilitation committees. So if you did a survey of the reports and the documents submitted to each of these committee meetings, you will notice from a law of the sea perspective that there is not much discussion on UNCLOS, but it is actually in the legal committee that questions relating to UNCLOS would most likely be raised. So for example, this is an excerpt from the RSC outcome of the legal committee. And the reason why UNCLOS has not been largely discussed during the RSC is because the committees are really only looking at their instruments, at the instruments that are under their purview. So they are not per se in charge of UNCLOS because MSC has its own safety conventions, the legal committee has its own liability and compensation conventions, and the facilitation committee has its FAL convention. So the IMO throughout this whole process is conscious of the need for the whole process to be consistent with the Law of the Sea Convention. And that is an issue that will be further discussed in the upcoming work on the IMO's agenda. So for now, the development of instruments, whether on a non-mandatory basis or a mandatory basis, would be only initially for cargo ships. But later on, the work of the bodies may adjust so as to see whether it's possible to develop the same rules for passenger ships if the safety measures can be adequately met. So now the work of the IMO with respect to MAS is occurring on a joint level between all of the three committees that are concerned. So if in the first place they were doing it independently of each other, now it is happening through the work of the joint MSC Legal Facilitation Working Group on MAS. And it is deemed that they are agreeing to work towards the entry into force of a mandatory code by January 2028. So that's just 6 years from now. And what we heard from industry players is that they are waiting for the regulation and the technology is actually already largely available. And we will see very soon an interaction of non-conventional autonomous ships vis-a-vis conventional ships as we know it in ocean spaces. Okay, so onto substance. What are the main concerns that have come out from these regulatory scoping exercises, there are questions on whether the role and responsibility of master and crew as it is envisioned in the UNCLOS can be met when you essentially have nobody on board these autonomous ships. There is also a proliferation of new roles, such as in the concept of a remote operator who is working out of a remote operating center. And the question there is whether the remote operator is your new master and what are the responsibilities of this new entity as such. Lately, there has also been a question of what actually is a MAS. And that is coming on later, in a later stage, considering that we are now 2022. But that involves a rethinking of the 4 degrees of autonomy that I showed you earlier. And then there is a question of certificates. As you know, certificates are required, some certificates, particularly insurance certificates, are required to be carried on board ships when on international voyages. So the question there is, how will this requirement be met in a setup of an autonomous ship? So those are some of the lingering questions for now. In September, IMO organized a seminar on MAS that was attended by Law of the Sea scholars, national maritime authorities, and industry developers. And through this, we have been made aware more of the interpretive issues arising from the interaction of the IMO and UNCLOS regimes. So this will be taken up in the meetings scheduled for the Joint Working Group in 2023. Okay. Just very quickly, one of the latest updates is the Maritime Safety Committee, through a correspondence group and a working group specific to MAS, have developed a draft MAS code based on its goal-based standards framework. And this is the skeleton of that draft MAS code. So of course, this is just for information purposes. But if you do look at the documents of the IMO, you will see that some of this skeleton has been filled up and is, of course, subject to further deliberation and revision. Okay. So this is the roadmap towards the 2028 entry into force goal. So things are moving very quickly, in fact. And it's a very exciting time to be looking at new technologies. And some of this I've already discussed earlier, but I would just flag the third issue, which is an issue that the legal committee is looking directly at, which is questions on liability and compensation. An example question would be whether a remote operator, the new entity of the remote operator, falls within the concept of a manager and operator to which the ship owner's liability extends in the liability and compensation conventions. So here, that's one of the examples of the issues that we are going to continuously contend with. And then, of course, consideration of non-IMO instruments, one of them being the Law of the Sea Convention and other conventions. Okay, thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Espinosa, for updating us on the current work of the IMO, in particular, the work relating to the MAS, the maritime autonomous surface ships. This issue, I understand, emerged from the technological advance in this shipbuilding, I think. Yeah. And particularly, I wish to note that and she just picked up some legal issues relating to this operation of a MAS. Then, for instance, the role and the responsibility of master, the role and the responsibility of remote operator, the status of remote operator as a seafarer, and the questions of liability, in relation to new actors, and also some other things for closely of definitions of mass and the certificates. And our next speaker, Mr. Baker Mopato. Okay, and he is connected to us via Zoom. First, let me introduce him. He is from Uganda. He is a PhD scholar in sustainable development. And Amrita Fisher, Vidafita in India. He is a recipient of the 2022 Global Future Environment Leaders Scholarship as one of the distinguished young environmental researchers, leaders, and the managers from the Global South. He is currently a researcher based at the United Nations University Flores in Dresden, Germany, which is one of the 13 global research centers and internationally recognized think tanks of the United Nations University. His topic is integrating the climate change paradox into a maritime jurisdiction of a small island developing state. Mr. Maputo, you have the floor. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Thank you very much to the Korea Maritime Institution and also the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries for this great opportunity to present my topic. And it's called Integrating the Climate Change Paradox into the Jurisdiction of Small Island Developing States. And I must say that I'm also a recipient of the 2016 Yellow Scholarship in YOSU. So before I start, I think I'll need to bring the attention of the audience that we need to think and imagine a situation where climate change is affecting small island developing states. So what do you think will happen, especially to the population there, to the resources there, and also to the provisions of the UNCLOS? As presented by Professor Oro in yesterday's presentation, we saw that there is a complexity in how small island developing states will sustain their jurisdictions in case of climate change. And also I want to present partly an extension of what was talked about yesterday. And in my presentation, I'm going to give a description of SIDs and also a breakdown of the historical and emerging challenges facing these countries, then the legal status of these countries based on the UNCLOS and other legal instruments, and how climate change and historical maritime jurisdictional gaps is perpetuating these vulnerabilities. Then the possibilities, what are the possibilities to bridge such gaps? And I also give a conclusion based on my analysis of that. So when you talk of SIDs, now we basically look at three general maritime regions, which are the Caribbean, Pacific, and Atlantic, Indian Ocean, and Mediterranean, plus the South China Sea. All those countries which are located there fall under SIDs. And currently we have 58 SIDs, 38 of which are UN member states and 20 are non-UN member states. So I'll show you this in the next slide. So when you talk of SIDs, we mainly look at countries that are scattered across those regions, and most of them share a history of colonialism, and they rely heavily on the ocean for their livelihoods. However, most of them experience vulnerabilities relating to the environment, socioeconomic status, and also declining maritime resources in their jurisdictions. So most of these countries are in fragile environments and fragile regions, and the area where they are located is like a flux of conflict, is their conflict zones. And what you have to know is that the SIDs issues were brought to the fore in the 1992 Earth Summit that was in Rio de Janeiro. So in this map, we can look at the spatial extent of SIDs. So most of them are noted in red, and in the Caribbean, in the Pacific Ocean, like places like Tuvalu, Marshall Island, Cook Island, all these countries fall under SIDs. And in here, we look at the vulnerabilities that they have. For example, 63.2 million people in these countries have an annual GDP of 600 billion when you combine the GDP of these countries. But one vulnerability is 60% of these countries, especially in the Pacific, rely on imports for their foods. Even though they have maritime resources like fish, they don't have the capacity to fish. And we'll see later that this is really a big issue in maritime affairs. And also a third of these countries have issues related to non-communicable diseases. So because of feeding, and also 17% of them are experiencing the largest annual losses due to damages emanating from natural disasters. And this means that even though they have a small GDP, these disasters are also increasing on the problems they are facing. So when you read literature, we realize that most of these challenges that face these countries are partly historical, and some of them are increasingly emerging because there are few pathways that can be used to prevent or control these problems. One problem they face is their location is disadvantaged. For example, they stay away, far away from most global civilization, especially in the Pacific. So that affects access to some of the modern technologies and resources. And also, when you look at the complexity in maritime law relating to the definition of islands, it means that most of these countries either will lose their jurisdictional rights, or they have to rely on colonial masters to enforce their territorial rights. Then also another challenge that they face is the limited mechanisms that incorporate the changes, especially environmental changes related to climate change. So UNCLOS and the provisions that are there hardly incorporate these changes into the SID's needs. And also, according to research by the World Ocean Assessment, it is shown that maritime jurisdictions of these countries are compromised, especially by their colonial masters, for example, in the Cook Islands. And if they are not compromised, they lack the capacity, for example, to conduct maritime research and negotiations. Then when you look at the principle of environmental refugees, it is not well regulated and defined, especially under Article 1A, Section 2 of the 1951 Refugee Convention, and also the 1967 protocol relating to the status of refugees. So it means that if there is a scenario that climate change affects these countries, the population of these people does not have like the legal mandate to, for example, claim their rights. There's a recent scenario that was highly published about a refugee from Kiribati who went to New Zealand, and he was denied asylum because his status was not well defined. And also when you look at the global frameworks, there are some misses we can get from there. For example, financing. There is limited financing to support these countries. And also there are geopolitical issues, especially when you read about the Convention on Biological diversity strategic plan, it is shown that sustainable territorial protection of SIDs is really lacking. And when you look at IPCC reports, it is projected that most of these countries will experience the worst effects. And also the legal challenges have also proliferated. For example, I talked of the Montevideo Convention on inundated states and climate change threatened population. They are not well defined. When you look at UNCLOS Article 76 on complying with the demands for technical and scientific guidelines, it is shown that SIDs really have little capacity to enforce that. And also currently, when you look at some provisions that are trying to enforce the needs of these countries, like the Warsaw International Mechanism for loss and damage, it is still in infancy stage, meaning that it is not yet known when these countries really will get the required legal power and mandate to, for example, protect their territory. And also, when you look at the non-refoulement principle, it just shows you that SIDs will lose their rights if mechanisms are not really there to promote that. And the recent BBNG negotiations, they really less focus on the revision of the common heritage of humankind principle. And because of that, it means that it is perpetuating the vulnerabilities of these countries and populations to climate change. So I continue here by showing some of the legal instruments that are there. I've said some of them really don't focus on protecting SIDs. And what has been done is most of these countries have now tried to design regional agreements. For example, in the Caribbean, there is the Caribbean Basin Economic Recovery Act. When you look at in Pitcairn Islands, they are trying to develop some legislations like marine protected area ordinances. And most of these ordinances are not really enforced or part of UNCLOS. So it means that because they work in isolation, they don't form the global benchmark that can be used to sustain the economies of these countries. So in here, it means that because of that and the current climate change effects, it means that vulnerabilities in these countries are being perpetuated. And when you look in the context of UNCLOS, how do these vulnerabilities really threaten these countries? There are many issues, some of which are related to the complexity in the management of marine resources. Some are related to marine pollution and waste. And for example, when you look at climate change effects, they're increasing the need for MSR in the EEZ of SIDs. But because of the limited capacity I've shown before, it means that big maritime powers will take over this research, and it means that they can usurp the powers of these countries. And also, the sea level rise is jeopardizing the historical maritime regime, especially to the entitlement of maritime resources in these countries. And these effects are continuing to, for example, show that they might be coastal baseline changes. And due to that, it will threaten UNCLOS section 2, 5, 6, 7, 8, especially on guidelines to determine coastal baselines. Then also climate change in some countries is leading to loss of territory due to submergence. For example, in Kiribati, we can see that some atolls like Tarawa are increasingly getting lost, but there is no legal mechanism to protect this. And also climate change is likely to alter maritime zones, baselines, and delineation zones in these countries as provided for by UNCLOS Article 1, Part 2. then it also increased on the complexities involving the already bureaucratic terms for extended continental shelf and conditionalities for maritime research for extended continental shelf delineation in these countries. So it means that with climate change effects, most of these SIDs are going to be more vulnerable, and thus the gaps in UNCLOS and other legal mechanisms to protect them mean that the future is bleak for these countries and something needs to be done. So in here, I recommend like some possibilities that we can do to bridge such gaps. And one of them could be a draft article or subsection in the UNCLOS could be inserted to define islands and their territory in case of climate change. In other words, we need to call for like a draft article that can be used to protect the rights of these countries, especially those that might be lost completely, like Kiribati. And two, there is need for provisions that specifically focus on safeguarding the sovereignty of SIDs, especially their maritime space and populations. And I think the BBNJ negotiations are really something good that we can bank on. And also, thirdly, as UNCLOS, because it's considered a living instrument, to live with this fact of climate change, I think submissions of SIDs that are currently affected by climate change, they need to be discussed, and also sustainable resolutions that were implemented or are called for in the 1992 Earth Summit need to be enforced. Then lastly, as I conclude, I could argue that since there is an overt inconsistency in provisions of maritime rights and contestations over authority for SIDs that are threatened by climate change, it is possibly crucial to develop a specific legal option to safeguard the rights of these countries. And two, by developing such provisions, I think that there could be a realization of connectivity between maritime laws with sustainable management of territorial rights of both communities and resources of SIDs. I conclude by thanking the KMI and also the distinguished professors of Yosua Academy of Law of the Sea for giving me this opportunity to present at this conference. These are some of the references I use, and a big thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matofu, for your comprehensive presentation. And you have enlightened us on the challenges facing small and the developing state caused by climate change. Thank you again. Now then, our next speaker, Ms. Soto Sanchez, and please go ahead. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Well, as I introduce my presentation, I'm proposing a remodel of the Common Heritage of Mankind principle. So I will ask you for, during my presentation, to forget about what you know already about the CHM principle. As it has been said along this conference, everything is interconnected. The speakers that precede me have touched several issues on the protection and preservation of the marine environment. This shows that on the one hand, the Law of the Sea Convention is a framework that imposes in all the states parties an obligation to protect and preserve the marine environment, but this is not limited within their maritime territory. This extends to areas beyond national jurisdiction. And this protection and preservation was expected to be done in all-encompassing sense. That is not only in respect of the prevention, reduction, and control of marine pollution, which the state practice shows that has heavily relied on the control of marine pollution in a state of prevention. However, now we are here celebrating the 40 years of the implementation and enforcement of the Law of the Sea Convention. Many things have evolved during this time, especially the judicial practice of the Tribunal on the Law of the Sea that has provided further tools concerning the protection and preservation of the marine environment, especially that has acknowledged the implicit link between the precautionary principle and the obligations on the protection and preservation of the marine environment of due diligence to state parties. So that means that the obligations of the states parties are not reduced to that explicitly stated in the original text of the convention. Not only the judicial precedents have to be taken into consideration nowadays, but the whole international framework, and that is not only the treaties on the law of the sea, but also all other treaties, especially on human rights and the recognition of indigenous people's rights. The whole international framework, because we are, as a global society, the ocean is interconnected and affects us in all different ways and at all different levels. So this, the understanding of the seas and oceans cannot be reduced to one treaty. The whole system has to be studied and implemented in as long as it is compatible with the convention. Now, going further into the core of my presentation, the common heritage of mankind. Well, the text of the convention does not expressly provide a definition of what is the common heritage of mankind. Article 136 states that the seabed and the subsoil thereof are considered the common heritage of mankind. But during the negotiations, there was the discussions among the states, especially from Chile, was to state that the common heritage of mankind should be the whole marine environment. But that, that proposal did not reach the final draft of the convention. However, also the history recognizes to Arvid Pardo as the ambassador, the former ambassador of Malta, who came up with this notion, with this idea. But on the law of the sea affairs, this idea can be traced back to prior scholars. And if we are talking about a term that is denominated as the common heritage of mankind, then when does humankind start? If we go back to that, then we have to look into indigenous people. They are the first inhabitants of this world. They, for millennia, they coexist with the Earth system in a way that was sustainable, in a way that did not face the challenge that we are facing right now, given the development that as a global society we have achieved so far. So if indigenous peoples as the first inhabitants of the earth were able to coexist in a harmonic and balanced way with the earth system without jeopardizing and facing challenges as we are now, they should have been doing something right, something that we as a contemporary society have not considered. Thus, on this basis, I trace back the origin, the notion of a common heritage of mankind to indigenous people knowledge. What I consider the most ancient knowledge recorded among us. And even when in strict technical terms, there's not yet a recognized definition of what is indigenous people knowledge, I propose a definition that indigenous people knowledge should be considered as the holistic living system of lore on the balance of the Earth system and its intrinsic interconnection amid all living and non-living beings that has been preserved and passed down through generations. One of the crucial points of the indigenous people knowledge and cosmovision is that they do not see, and this is common to more than one group, is that they don't see the self as something above the environment. They see themselves as part of it. They recognize that their coexistence depends on nature. And for its own survival, they need nature. They need to protect and preserve the environment. Traditionally, the understanding of indigenous people rights, it's land-based, but there are a lot of groups that have interconnection even with areas beyond national jurisdiction. So this approach, this biocentric approach, is something that we should bring and embrace, aiming the truly holistic protection and preservation of the marine environment. Now, even when it has been natural or evident for indigenous people since ancient times, it has been recently acknowledged this biocentric approach in the human rights context. Recently, on October of this year, the United Nations General Assembly issued a resolution stating, among other things, that the protection of the environment as a whole is a human right on which life itself depends on. So this happened just this year. On 2020, at a regional level, the Inter-American Court on Human Rights issued a similar ruling recognizing that for human life to exist, the preservation and protection of the environment as a whole is imminent. So now, on the law of the sea issue, during the negotiations, given the uncertainty and lack of knowledge about what would be the potential outcomes of extractive activities such as deep sea mining, push decision makers to specifically state that the area should remain as the common heritage of mankind principle in order to provide some sort of extra protection until more knowledge will be available about the potential outcomes. Then, 40 years later, we are here, and the International Seabed Authority has not only the challenge of implement and enforce Part 12 to protect and preserve the marine environment, but also together with the precautionary principle as it has been ruled by the ITLOS. But more importantly, the obligation of public participation for humankind. Humankind, in my opinion, cannot be reduced only to states. The evolution that our global society has gone through for the last 40 years shows that if it is true that states are the traditional subjects of international law, they are not the only ones. Indigenous people have been systematically discriminated and not taken into consideration neither for decision nor policy making. So if it is indeed the decision and is indeed the common heritage of mankind, all those minerals and resources that lie down there in the area, then humankind should have the voice on the decision making, and that includes indigenous people. Indigenous autonomous people within a specific state or territory, and those people who have not attained independence or other self-governing status. That, for example, it could be Palestine, Kosovo. So humankind should have a voice, and until today, the ISA, the Seabed Authority, does not have a public participation mechanism for humankind. Also, states parties are ipso facto of parts of the ISA, but a more inclusive forum, as some scholars have argued, would be the United Nations General Assembly. Yes. We are facing challenging times. The common heritage of mankind principle as the most general idea that prevails at the time heavily revolves on economic profits and on an economic profile. But it is indeed true that the exploitation of the area would be for the benefit of the humankind, leaving aside the economic profits that will be obtained for that. If humankind and the global society has taken 40 years to expressly acknowledge that our own existence relies on the environment, specifically the marine environment, which is the biggest environment of their system, that it is really true that it would be a benefit as a result of the economic exploitation of the deep sea mining if until today we don't have an integrated knowledge about the potential outcomes, and that doesn't limit to social science or natural science, because indigenous people knowledge has not been taken into consideration for the assessment of such activities yet. So in this general presentation, I would say that considering that indigenous people knowledge is the holistic living system of lore on the balance of their system and its intrinsic interconnections amid all living and non-living beings that has been preserved and passed down through generations, the true genesis of the CHM principle relies on it. Thus, the CHM principle is the general principle of international law to protect and preserve the environment comprehended by the Earth's indigenous peoples. Knowledge aiming on an integral protection and preservation of the marine environment. I firmly believe that this is the time to bring all actors, all subjects of international law, especially humankind, to the decision and policy making on the potential opening and initiation of activities in the area. 40 years of the draft and adoption of the Law of the Sea Convention. It is indeed a living treaty, which will remain as a living treaty as long as it has the capacity to address the current and emerging challenges. And that capacity is on our hands, all actors, all humankind. And this is the moment to act. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Soto Sanchez, and for your excellent presentation. I wish to note one interesting point, and she linked the notion of common heritage of mankind to indigenous people's knowledge concerning protection and preservation of marine environment. Okay. Now I invite to Mr. Perez to the floor. Yeah, please go ahead.
Right. Thank you very much. My presentation, in fact, overlaps with the presentation done by my colleague, Ms. Soto Sanchez. So I will not go through the definition of the CHM principle. I will just go through the legal status of this principle. And the legal status of the CHM principle is highly debated by scholars. Some consider this principle as part of customary international law, whereas some consider it as just Kogan's and just Kogan obligations. On the other hand, this principle has also been included in some treaties, for example, the Moon Treaty and the Outer Space Treaty, which implies that the CHM principle should be considered as part of the treaty law. So I will just refer to some of the articles of UNCLOS in which this issue has been, this principle has been discussed. Those articles includes Article 137, 140, 141, 143, 148, 150, 152, 153, 160, and 238. And some of these articles, those have been explained by my colleague, Ms. Sanchez, just in her presentation. So I will just go to the role of ISA in the CHM principle. ISA has been assigned a key role under UNCLOS to administer areas of CHM, as well as to ensure effective implementation of the CHM principle in such areas. However, ISA is facing a lot of challenges in meeting its goals, and the responsibilities of ISA, I will briefly discuss that ISA has the responsibilities to govern the areas of CHM, to equitably allocate common resources among state parties, and to ensure compliance with the rules of UNCLOS in the activities pursued by states to utilize the resources in that area. The ISA is the entity through which states that are parties to the UNCLOS legitimize their activities of taking the benefits from area beyond national jurisdiction. These activities also include deep seabed mining, which is carried out to procure equitable and valuable minerals from the area. ISA also regulates the activities of state parties in that area, and in performing the duties, the ISA acts for the whole humanity in the area of CHM. It monitors the extraction of benefits derived from exploration, including deep seabed mining and other activities performed in the area of CHM. Moreover, it also has responsibility to conduct and promote scientific research in the area, and then to share the results of research with the state parties. It also has the added responsibility to perform measures to promote technology considered useful for conducting scientific research and other beneficial activities in the area. And in this regard, ISA must promote cooperation among states in transferring technology to developing countries to conduct resource utilization activities in that area. It is also an essential responsibility of ISA to perform certain measures that could ensure the protection of the marine environment in the areas from all kind of perils, including pollution, drilling, excavation, and installation of cables and pipelines. So I will briefly discuss some of the hurdles which ISA is facing regarding the implementation of the CHM principle. There are some challenges faced by ISA in the implementation of the CHM principle. The foremost challenge relates to the distribution of benefits acquired from the resources of ABNJ. UNCLOS only mentions that the resources should be shared equitably, but fails to provide any quantitative tools or distributive mechanism through which that equitable amount for each resource can be measured and distributed to the stakeholders. Hence, ISA faces the issue of an absence of a project mechanism to equitably distribute the benefits among shareholders. Developing states can benefit from the voting process adopted by the Assembly and the Council, as they can make coalitions with each other and vote for favorable outcomes of the of some of the issue under discussion, and thus utilize higher benefits from the resources in the area, whether or not they have the necessary technology or to perform mining, drilling, or similar activity to extract minerals or other resources. So I will just go through some of the controversies and issues related to the implementation of the CHM principles. And one of those difficulties is the jurisdiction. This is like the CHM principle considers that the ABNJ and their resources are the common property of the whole of mankind, and therefore it cannot be exploited unilaterally by any one state. In fact, no state can exercise jurisdiction over the resources in the area. Hence, the CHM principle disregards the traditional concept of international law, the concept of acquisition of territory, according to which a state can acquire territory through cessation, conquest, or controlling newly discovered islands. Historically, several states have spread their territorial limits like this. However, the CHM principle rejects such methods of controlling ABNJ and considers that ABNJ is the property of the whole of the mankind, and therefore no one state can acquire ownership of the area. Then about the equitable distribution, as I have just discussed, that UNCLOS says that the resources should be utilized equitably among the states, but the mechanism, that is very subjective. So I think there is a dire need to sort out this issue so that the resources can be utilized in an equitable way and distributed among the stakeholders in a just way. And then another issue is the peaceful utilization of the area. Some scholars are of the view, rather I must say that critics of the CHM principles argue that it does not have specifically mentioned the peaceful utilization of the area. To substantiate this assertion, the 1986 Seoul Declaration made by the International Law Association is regarded as a reference for the area that, for the idea that the area is not specified to be used only for peaceful purposes. The declaration was subject to the CHM principle, and it did not mention that the area and the resources were necessarily to be used for peaceful purposes only. Some critics infer from that the peaceful utilization concept does not exist in the CHM principle. However, other argues that the area is specified to be used for peaceful purposes only because non-peaceful utilization would imply no benefit for mankind. So this is an important thing. Another issue is the environmental protection. That some experts consider that the CHM principle has no underlying concept endorsing an environmental protection in the area. Another is that the changes brought into the original CHM principle, like during the discussions in the 1994 implementation agreement of Part 11 of UNCLOS, brought some changes to UNCLOS to make it acceptable to development states. These changes were made because developing states, including the US, raised some objection to UNCLOS owing to its deep seabed mining related provisions. However, after accepting the concern of developed states, the provision endorsing market-oriented features were added to Part 11 of UNCLOS, which were later endorsed by the developed states. So, I mean, this CHM principle is really very important because, you know, these resources, I mean, these should be utilized and those should be equitably distributed among the stakeholders so that everyone can get the benefit of it in a just way. So thank you very much. I'm really grateful. So my presentation basically overlapped with my colleagues. So but I've tried to explain some points which he didn't mention in our.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Qureshi, for your wonderful presentation, and particularly for your explanation concerning the roles and the responsibilities of the Internal Seabed Authority and the challenges facing it in implementing the principle of common heritage to mankind. Our last speaker, Mr. Joffrey. He is already there. Yeah, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, it's good to see you again in this afternoon session. My name is Hoon Cho, a PhD graduate from University of Glasgow, and in fact, I've just graduated. My graduation ceremony was last Monday, so I think that I can say that I'm the most. No, I'm not intention to. I think I'm the most fresh doctoral PhD graduate here. So first of all, I'd like to express my deepest and sincere gratitude to the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries of Korea and Korea Maritime Institute for inviting me today to this wonderful session. And also, I'm greatly honored to have an opportunity to present my research today and also to be here in this Agora session with my great colleagues. So as shortly and briefly introduced in the morning session, the topic that I'm going to present today is challenges to UNCLOS Part 15 and the answers from the tribunals. And in this presentation, I will present the challenges that the Part 15 system has faced in the past, the challenges it faces today, and the challenges it will face in the future. And then this presentation will examine how the tribunals have resolved and addressed those issues. So without further delay, I will begin my presentation. Yes. Okay, so let me firstly briefly introduce the UNCLOS Part 15. As you all well know about this, the Part 15 of UNCLOS regulates the dispute settlement mechanisms for this convention. And the key feature of this system is that it introduces the compulsory dispute settlement mechanisms into the convention. The compulsory jurisdiction indicates the competence of the court to decide a unilaterally brought cases following the previously made agreement without the ad hoc consent of the respondent, even over the objection of that respondent. And Part 15 of UNCLOS contains the procedural law of this convention, which governs the mechanisms of the court's judicial actions and functions, as well as the method by which the state parties may enforce their rights in the courtroom. And normally, international courts and tribunals take control of the implementation of these procedural law and procedural legal system. Therefore, they are autonomous actors in influencing the procedural law, whereas other actors like state parties would have only a minimum possibility of doing so. So I think that this shows that whatever challenges are raised over the rules of Part 15, those questions would be primarily answered by the tribunals seized of jurisdiction under Part 15, which can be referred to as Part 15 tribunals. Then first, let us see the challenges that the Part 15 of UNCLOS has faced in the past, especially right after the conclusion of this convention. After the conclusion of this convention in 1982, many doubts and concerns were raised over the system due to the multiplicity of forums. Article 287 of UNCLOS enlists the multiple options that state parties may choose for resolving their dispute, and the enumerated forums are ITLOS, the ICJ, an arbitral tribunal constituted under Annex 7, and Annex 8 special arbitral tribunals. Under this system, however, multiple judicial bodies can determine how the dispute settlement system would work and function in each different dispute circumstances. And since there is no structural hierarchy between these forums, we cannot rule out the possibility of accumulation of the contradictory jurisprudence if the same procedural questions are raised before each different judicial institutions. Moreover, the default form of this system is an arbitral tribunal constituted under Annex 7, which is technically an ad hoc tribunals. Therefore, many authors express their concerns like the contradictory jurisprudence was the price of securing the consensus on the Part 15 system, or this will lead to the problem of continuity and consistency in building their jurisprudence. And one author even assumed that the uniformity of jurisprudence was not considered as a high priority by the drafters. However, contrary to those early concerns and criticisms, what we could see over the last 25 years of judicial practices was that the jurisprudence on the Part 15 rules has been largely maintained in a convergent way. Here, I'd like to suggest 3 contributing factors to the establishment of a coherent jurisprudence on the rules of Part 15. The first one is that all the forums and tribunals in the past were under the control of a single constitutive instrument, which is Part 15 of UNCLOS. Well, this may sound as just a repetition of the former slide, but however, in general in international law, even in the absence of an overarching legal framework of procedural law, the courts and tribunals normally seek guidance from each other to resolve the similar procedural law issues that each different judicial bodies faces. This suggests that this cross-fertilizing tendency of international court tribunals would be more likely to be found between Part 15 tribunals, which are under the same and common procedural legal framework, and when faced with the same questions raised over the rules of Part 15. The second contributing factor is that there was an overlap of judiciary branch between different cases brought under UNCLOS Part 15. As an example, here is the list of the arbitrators of the cases under Annex 7 of UNCLOS so far. And the figure within the round bracket next to the name of the arbitrator shows the number of the cases appointed to each of the arbitrators. I'm not sure that whether the figure is clear enough, but as you can see, many arbitrators have been appointed for more than one cases, and even some arbitrators like Judge Wolfram have been appointed in as many as 5 different proceedings. So when there is an overlap of the judiciary members between different courts, the same judges are likely to bring a common experience to their work. Hence, the overlap in the international judiciary branch may affect the common practice on procedural issues between different judicial bodies. The third factor is that one of the essential functions given to UNCLOS Part 15 was to secure the uniformity and continuity in interpreting the convention. This indicates that the Part 15 tribunals not just had to settle the dispute peacefully in the past, but also they had to fulfill their mandate to ensure the uniformity in interpreting and applying the convention. Here I suggest there can be no doubt that this role was the same with regard to the Part 15 rules. Then I'm gonna move on to the current challenges which Part 15 is facing today. The challenges that Part 15 tribunals are facing recently and currently can be said as the criticisms of the so-called expansion of jurisdiction. The recent controversy over expansion of jurisdiction is relating to the tribunal's subject matter jurisdiction, which is basically regulated by Article 288 of UNCLOS. The dictionary term of expansion means the stretching the scope, views, or other things to reach what they did not originally include. If applying this dictionary term expansion to the context of Part 15 of UNCLOS, then the jurisdictional expansion of the tribunal by the tribunals means that the tribunals extend the scope of compulsory jurisdiction provided by the convention in order to settle the matters that cannot be covered by its original purview of competence. And in particular, this controversy has been triggered in recent proceedings, especially in the cases where the so-called mixed dispute case were raised, where the interpretation of Part 15 provisions was at the center of the dispute or thoroughly discussed, and where the tribunals determined the issues not directly regulated by the convention. And however, I think that this controversy is gradually being resolved by the tribunals. And what can we observe throughout the recent jurisprudence is that their contribution has been more like clarifying the rules of Part 15 rather than simply expanding their jurisdiction. When you look at the examples showing that the tribunal's jurisdiction may reach beyond the purview of UNCLOS, we can find that they did not simply open up the possibility of exercising their jurisdiction, but also provided certain limitations in doing so. In addition, there are some times when the tribunals must address novel jurisdictional issues that they have never had a chance to resolve before, which also may appear to be expanding their jurisdiction. Therefore, I think that if these practices are just construed as expanding compulsory jurisdiction, it would be an oversimplification of the tribunal's overall contributions. And secondly, I think that we should note the fact that the UNCLOS is not a self-contained treaty. Although the convention covers a wide variety of ocean affairs, but it cannot contain all the rules necessary for regulating each substantive regimes under UNCLOS. Therefore, many provisions of the convention directly refer to other rules of international law or generally accepted international regulations. In this sense, the tribunal's exercise of jurisdiction over the issues beyond the convention in order to address those provisions can be seen as fulfilling a role as a comprehensive and effective dispute settlement system. Then I think that this can be the reason why, for instance, in many cases applying Article 293, the Part 15 tribunals continuously and explicitly stated that this provision does not extend a tribunal's jurisdiction. And lastly, I'd like to raise some challenges ahead that the Part 15 system may encounter in the future. The first of all, I think that the recent challenges raised to UNCLOS regime themselves are also expected to be the future challenges for the Part 15 system. Throughout this conference from yesterday, there are many issues that may arise against and toward and in relations to these conventions. Various issues can be included here, such as the ongoing crisis over the climate change, and the advances in science and technologies related to maritime affairs, or the emergence of diverse and novel state practices in the ocean. Since we cannot rule out the possibility of a new type of dispute covering both UNCLOS and those matters concerning these new issues, I believe that the challenges to UNCLOS in the future could also be the challenges to UNCLOS Part 15. Secondly, the making of the new treaties directly introducing the Part 15 system can be another challenging point for future Part 15. I brought two examples here. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. I brought two examples here. For instance, the agreement to prevent unregulated high seas fisheries in the Central Arctic Oceans concluded in 2019 regulates that the Part 8 of the 1995 agreement will apply mutatis mutandis to this agreement. And we all know that the Part 8 of this 1995 agreement is adopting the Part 15 system of UNCLOS. More recently, one of the options concerning the settlement of the dispute of the revised draft text of the BBNJ agreement this year also stipulates that the Part 15 of UNCLOS may apply to any dispute concerning this agreement. Given that many thoughts were raised over the working of UNCLOS Part 15 in the past and present, how the Part 15 system would work and function within the context of these newly made treaties beyond UNCLOS could be another future challenge. Thirdly and lastly, I think that the future of international adjudication itself should be also considered here as well. Here are some old ideas and issues such as the state's traditional reluctance to recourse to third-party dispute resolution, the compliance matter, or the concerns raised over the proliferation of international judicial bodies can be equally and continuously raised in assessing the success of the Part 15 system in the future. Thus, as a conclusion regarding these upcoming challenges to UNCLOS Part 15, it would be very interesting to see how the Part 15 tribunals will answer to those newly arising challenges and what the future Part 15 system under this convention will look like. So that is all my presentation today, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Zhou, for your succinct presentation on the complex UNCLOS dispute settlement mechanism. And then I think all of us here have been enlightened on how this complex system of dispute settlement under UNCLOS has been operated so far. And then also I wish to express my thanks to him for just informing us the new challenges under this Part 15. Now then we have the six young scholars, and now then already 3:05, and I wish to invite just a couple of requests for comment or questions. And is anybody wishing to take the floor? Yeah, okay.
This relates to the presentation by Ms. Maria, the issue of having the UAV equivalent in the maritime domain, the MAS system. So she dealt with this issue of the new activity at the IMO regarding the regulating MAS system. I would like to just ask her just to let me enlighten about this issue of because this autonomous system is a very controversial system. Is very as far the legality is concerned, and the UN intergovernmental expert group is also looking into this, and it has failed to develop any sort of consensus. The issue is how the IMO is going to kind of create a mechanism for regulating this MAS system, because this is an area which is not only involves the maritime tools, it involves the technology, new technology like the cyber. And there's a lot of disagreement among the states as far as the cyber issues are concerned. The UN governmental group has also failed to come out with the kind of any sort of norms to govern the cyberspace. So I think it's it is an interface. The point is, it is an interface of so many complex challenges, and how this IMO is going to navigate through these challenges. That is the kind of question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. I think the answer is exactly what the IMO has been doing the last few years. We are trying to navigate all of those aspects that you said are being brought together in this one issue of what are autonomous ships. And the IMO works on the basis of developing goal-based standards in acknowledgement that the technology may move faster than regulation. So by working on this goal-based framework, we are looking at what kind of rules will have to be adopted by the players so as to meet a standard that may have to be met at a certain point in the future. And the intent is that because we have NGOs participating in discussion on in the IMO with consultative status with the IMO, as well as industry players, then we are able to bring in the expertise of those bodies with knowledge in artificial intelligence, for example, and other mechanisms. So your other question was, how is it actually going to be brought about in the legal regime? IMO conventions have largely evolved through tacit amendment procedures to the bigger conventions such as SOLAS and MARPOL, and that is the way that a potential code on maritime autonomous surface ships is going to enter the picture as well. First, as a non-mandatory code, and then much like the Polar Code, later on potentially as a mandatory code to those instruments.
Just a quick question for our last speaker. So one of the challenges was about new agreements integrating Part 15. What level of the challenge are you saying? Do tribunals care that they have more business? I thought maybe that was a good thing. Is it the potential for more diverging interpretations, or are the tribunals not up to interpreting new legal instruments? Where is the challenge lying?
Yes, thank you for your questions. In fact, when I mentioned the challenges in terms of the future challenges, I do not just regard this term as a negative one. So maybe that can be as a, yes. So for example, like, as you mentioned, of course, there is a possibility that the working role of the ITLOS, even ICJ, or because this kind of new agreement is very technical and specialized, so maybe other forums will have a possibility of joining this, solving this Part 15 system. But in that sense, as I mentioned in my last slide, the current voices concerning the potential of the judicial competition between different forums, or the future risk over that can be raised over the divergent jurisprudence will also, I think that will also be raised again and again and again. So in that sense, I cannot, I think that, well, then I believe that the Part 15 tribunals in the future will also address those issues in a positive way, but still, at this point, we cannot deny that those sources can be a challenging point for the future as well. So thank you very much. And I apologize for the lack of certainty in my slide.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, mine is not a question, but a comment to Ms. Espinosa. The recent development of the MAS is really an important trend for the sea transportation on goods, and also that we can expect that probably 10 years later that most of the sea transportation will be covered by this kind of service. However, and also thanks to Ms. Espinosa for your introduction on this series of the IMO decision or resolution, and also the United Nations conventions. Just a comment or suggestion for your future study. According to my experience in Taiwan, we also noticed this kind of development. However, the domestic legislation has to follow up. And especially, for example, like the pilotage service at the port waters. Think about that. In the future, how about that kind of pilotage service will be fulfilled, right? And do we have to send out the like the electronic map of the port? But it concerns with the national security issues. So probably you could extend your future study to that area, thinking about those domestic legislation or practices. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Now then, David, yeah.
Can everybody hear me? Yes. Mr. Chair, I don't know whether I should beg your convenience or your pleasure. I've actually got a question for every single one of the speakers, but I suppose I'm not allowed to do that. All six, including Mr. Baker, who might still be on the, but I don't suppose I'm allowed to do that. So I'll ask a question about, and I'll deliver my questions to the individual speakers individually in the break. But can I just ask a question then about common heritage of mankind to both the speakers who, so yes, it's a discounted version of my intervention. On common heritage of mankind principle, first of all, Raquel, if I may say, excellent presentations, both of you. Mr. Qureshi, yes. If I can divide your approaches, one, Raquel, you were trying to introduce an overtly environmental and expansive interpretation to the common heritage of mankind principle. We tend to accept implicitly that the common heritage of mankind principle is a good thing. But was it actually a good thing? If you think about it, it's very anthropocentric. It's common heritage of, actually it should be humankind, of course, because, well, women should also participate, surely, right? So we, in terms of adding to it, maybe we should first ask ourselves, is it good enough? Is it good enough to actually encompass all the stakeholders, including the environmental and the indigenous peoples' stakeholding? So that's my question to you. Should we revisit the concept before trying to expand it? Should we look back before we go forward? And most specific, perhaps, Mr. Qureshi, your presentation was a little bit more on the application side. So can I ask you, is common heritage of mankind, where it then translates in the BBNJ agreement negotiations to common benefit, is that sufficient to fulfill the promise of common heritage of mankind principle? Or is it more than just common benefits for sharing? Because of course, as you know, the area is the common heritage of mankind. So it's kind of proprietal, but is that then limited to just benefit sharing, or is it more than just benefit sharing? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, it is a privilege to finally meet my fellow student, because we were at the same Jesu Academy, the 7th edition, but it was online. We were both dissertants in the first alumni symposium online, and we finally meet, and our presentations were quite similar, but from different approaches. Thank you for your question. Technically speaking and theoretically speaking, I use the same coin term, common heritage of mankind, to prevent rejection, theoretically speaking, because the term is already there. From my perspective, it's lacking precise content, precise definition of what it should be. And I use, in this, on my research, I give the content as tracing back its origin in an inclusive way from indigenous people knowledge. But however, yes, the term itself might not be the ideal, but it would be more challenging theoretically and technically speaking to bring a new term and to be accepted. It's similar, something similar that happens with the common concern, that there's some literature about that, but it has not been accepted. So that's why I use the same term, but with my own content. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So basically, my answer is also corollary to what she has explained. Because this is something, I mean, instead of common heritage, it's like an issue of common concern. So as far as the benefits which you have mentioned, I mean, then once this issue is settled, I think it will be very easy to determine that how the benefits or the beneficial interests should be equitably distributed among the parties, which may be the stakeholders or the states in general. So I think, but I totally agree with this point that the definition is very subjective at the moment. So there should be consensus on the basic definition and I mean the rules regarding the CHM principles. Those should be determined with deliberation with all the stakeholders, jurists, and different states. And mainly with the jurists, because they come up with many good ideas. So, I mean, that's how it goes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, all of us. And we have reached the conclusion of this session. We have already exceeded 20 minutes. Yeah. Okay, but yeah, thank you, all of us. And then I wish to, in advance, express Happy New Year, because we are approaching the end of the year. In advance, happy and prosperous and healthy New Year. And then for those people who are coming from abroad, and I wish to I wish a safe trip back to their home. Yeah. And lastly, and we have exceeded 20 minutes. Yeah. And I wish to thank the interpreters, and I wish to just invite all of you to. Okay, thank you, yeah.
Thank you. Now we have reached the end of the 10th Global Ocean Regime Conference. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your participation, and have a safe trip to your home, and see you again soon. Thank you. And to who joined today's excursion, please come to the lobby by 10 to 4.